All right. Somehow, some way, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this is your first time here, welcome to you. Everyone else, what's going on? I did a thing that I try not to do much of these days, but I watched the news earlier today, which I've been having difficulty getting out of my mind as I sat down here to introduce this week's episode. What struck me most from watching the news is how much I distrust institutions that I once really had deep faith in, that my trust and faith in core institutions of our society has been shaken in a way that it hasn't been before. And I wonder if people listening to this feel that way too. Maybe there are lots of people who don't. Maybe people still trust that what they're saying is true and that these things that are happening are as presented. But I really don't trust a lot of what I hear sometimes these days. And frankly, taking it out of the realm of the wide world and bringing it more to the foray of this show, in the same way, like the institutions of yoga that came to define it in its modern expression, at least in my lifetime, they've collapsed. I mean, we've been talking about this for years on the show, but more and more, it really feels like the foundations of what we have been teaching as yoga for decades has been called into question in a lot of ways. I certainly think that there's an aspect of yoga that can't be touched. I've been saying this forever, that, yoga's fine. You can't mess up yoga. And I think that's largely true. There's, in some regards, in my mind, a certain neutrality to yoga because of its wide lens and its ability to hold many different viewpoints. It doesn't necessarily insist upon one. And that, I think, is something that's unique to yoga as a rubric for inquiry. However, the modern day expressions, or the way that this has been handed from person to person, and the authorities and the wisdom holders of yoga, those who really shaped it for Westerners like myself, they have really been called into question in ways that I don't think people could have imagined even 10 years ago. And that has left people in a quandary. People really who have identified and made careers as yoga teachers have had to reckon with that. And it's certainly something I've talked about a lot on the show, and it's something that we're going to be talking about today with my guests, Vijay, Hassin, Sharada, Thompson, and Kathleen Rosenberg. And I do a bit of an introduction with them to kind of give us some context to have a conversation you'll hear. So I won't say too much about it now, only that all three of them have a relationship to integral yoga and Swami Satchidananda. And I had an episode some months back in December of 2023 with Radha Metro Midkiff from the Integral Yoga Institute in New York. We had a conversation about Swami Satchidananda, and this has come out of that conversation. They heard that conversation, and they are here to offer some different perspectives on Swami Satchidananda that I think reflect on what I was just referring to, on institutions crumbling and where that leaves those who were participating or were aligned with or inspired by those institutions. So I'm very grateful to the three of them for offering themselves up and their views, and I'm glad to be sharing that with you today. Real quick before we get to that, let me mention a couple of things. First, I have a live event May 4th and 5th in Austin, Texas. Are you anywhere near Austin, Texas? Do you know anyone near Austin, Texas? If so, I would very much like to meet you. May 4th and 5th in Austin, Texas. Also, there is still a very big discount on my newly released on-demand video course, the Yoga Modules. If you were someone who was thinking about that in the past and it was a little bit pricey for you, well, now it's being offered for $299, which is a very big discount. The Yoga Modules is still on sale. There's ongoing stuff, the live classes, the weekly discussion group, podcast premium if you want to dig into the full-length archives. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Vijay, Hassin, Sharada, Thompson, and Kathleen Rosenberg. Hello?
Hello.
Is this Sharada?
No, this is Kathleen.
Hi, Kathleen. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Jay.
I think Vijay and Sharada are here.
It's Sharada. Can you hear me?
Sharada, hi.
Hi. For some reason, my audio just wasn't popping up, but hi.
I'm Jay. Nice to meet you. Could you pronounce that for me again so I don't mispronounce it again?
Sharada. Kind of rhymes with, you could say Florida or Chardonnay.
Sharada, got it. Thank you. And I think Vijay is here too. Vijay, can you hear us, or you managed to get yourself unmuted?
Good morning. Where you are, good afternoon.
Yes. Nice to meet you, Vijay.
Nice to meet you.
All right. Well, here we are, and I am already recording, and if it's okay, I'd like to just think of us as having begun. Is that okay with you all?
Sure. Having what? I'm sorry?
Having begun.
Having
I say
begun,
that because
yes.
I don't want you to feel like surprised, and sometimes podcasts do like a formal thing where they like, okay, now we're going to start, and I just want us to have started, if that's okay with you.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I really appreciate the three of you making this time and having this conversation with me. If it's okay, I want to take a moment to maybe give us a little bit of context, because somebody listening to this might not have listened to the show or have any of the background that I think might be important before we get into any of the things that we have on the table to talk about today. It should be mentioned that this is a response to a previous episode that I published in December of 2023 with Radha Metro Midkiff, who at the time, and I think is still the case, although I didn't check, was the director for the Integral Yoga Institute in New York. And there is quite a bit of stuff that happened behind the scenes that I haven't spoken about before that I feel like might want to be mentioned, which is that at the time when that conversation happened, I had sort of sworn off trying to weigh into any controversies in the yoga world. I did that in the past quite a bit, and I think I did so sometimes in a way that was fruitful. I did have, women who were abused by Pattabhi Jois to tell what happened to him at a time when people really didn't want to hear it. And in other ways, I've kind of talked about it, because if you're someone like myself who is passionate about yoga, who at some point in your life dedicated yourself to it, even if you're not someone who has a guru or was part of a lineage tradition, it just is important to you. The revelations about these yoga masters and abuses have been really confusing. And so I felt like I needed to talk about it. Even in my own experience, one of my teachers, while he didn't do some of the things that some teachers did, he still did things that I wasn't okay with and had to reconcile. So those conversations have sometimes, I think, been useful and important, but there have also been times where I feel like there was a sensationalizing around these things. And then at some point, there was like a real politicization of these stories too. And I began to really question like the role I was playing. So I really backed away from trying to have them. And then out of nowhere, last December, I had been having a conversation with a friend of mine who I don't know if they would want to be named, so I won't use their name, but they were someone who was teaching at the Integral Yoga Institute in New York for many years and was reporting to me that there was quite a bit of upheaval in the community, that there were teachers in, I think, San Francisco or Los Angeles, I can't remember, on the West Coast, and then there was teachers in New York who were very upset and had written letters expressing that they were upset with the way that the Institute was handling, I guess, some more recent revelations of abuse from Swami Satchidananda. And he had discussed that with me in a meeting, and then randomly I got a email from a PR agent asking me if I wanted to have Radha on the show. And it was a strange and too uncanny a coincidence. So I did write an email saying I would be interested in having her on the show. However, these are the things that I would need to talk or want to talk with her about. And I made some bullet points and I listed in specific, recent allegations of abuse from Swami Satchidananda. And they went ahead and scheduled it. Now, in fairness, I think the PR person might have slipped up because Radha was not familiar with the show, and I don't think was passed all the information, so she was not aware that I was going to bring that stuff up. I think she thought it was going to be like a very different sort of podcast. However, I will say that in the moment when I was speaking with her, I feel like she did answer me honestly, and I felt like I asked the questions in a way that hopefully were purposefully not putting her in a defensive crouch, because I wanted her to say what she really thought and felt, And I think she did that. And after we recorded it, I very soon after got an email from her. She was very concerned. She wasn't sure she was supposed to talk about some of that stuff. She needed to check with some lawyers. And then the PR person got real nervous because they clearly had kind of screwed up, I think. And then, in dialogue with them, we said what we always say is like, if someone says something that they regret saying, in the past, I would have been like, tough luck. But nowadays, I'm definitely inclined to edit it out. I don't want someone to be unhappy with coming on the show. At the same time, there have been a few instances where I felt like what was said was important enough and it wasn't okay, especially if someone wants to just kill an episode. I'm not okay with that anymore. I'm not okay with killing episodes. So in any case, we went back and forth with them, and Radha and the PR agent ultimately were very supportive of it being published. It was the lawyers who were saying they didn't want it published, and we went ahead and published it anyways. And I expected there to be quite a bit of blowback. I feel like if I had posted an episode like that in years past, there would have been social media posts, and I would have gotten a lot of emails, and there would have been much more of an uproar. And there really wasn't this time. And I was surprised by that. And we have a mutual friend in Claire Sharada, and she mentioned you. And so I feel like the issues for me around that conversation are that it does give a viewpoint of someone who didn't have a firsthand experience of the abuses, and in certain ways seems to me maybe gloss over the real impact of it. I will say one other thing is that for myself also, it's been very confusing because there's so much of a spectrum of boundary stepping or abuse, like where somebody had a hands-on adjustment that they thought was amazing and they really appreciated, and somebody else had the same hands-on adjustment and thought it was a complete violation.
Mm.
And there's a kind of context of like people being on the mat and practicing. However, at the same time, for me, that's almost, there's some different questions there compared to people like yourself, maybe, who were part of a lineage tradition in which there was a guru yoga master. And for people who are newer into yoga, maybe they don't have a sense. Like when I came into yoga in the early 90s in New York City, these yoga masters were the authorities for yoga. And it seems to me that people who are in those spiritual communities and some of the things that happen there are different than like people having different feelings about hands-on adjustments. So I just say all of that as some preface, and to say that I am very happy to be having a different viewpoint and someone else to express some views on this matter. So I don't know if I hope that's helpful, and just thank you again for doing this.
Jay, it's really helpful because it fills in some little holes of things I didn't understand what was going on. So I appreciate it.
Good. Thank you. So maybe just to get us going here, I could get just each of you to introduce yourself a little bit, like maybe David or Vijay, forgive me, I don't know what you prefer. If you wouldn't mind just saying your name and what brings you here. I understand you were a student of Swami Satchidananda and you are Sharada's partner. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Jay, I started with integral yoga in 1967. I was one of the first students that Swamiji taught and became one of the first teachers. I subsequently founded the San Francisco Integral Yoga Institute in 1969, and then also was instrumental in establishing Yogaville West, which was a rural community in Cedar Springs, Lake County, California. I am a practicing licensed psychotherapist here in California and also a certified psychedelic assisted therapist. So I work a lot with folks who have trauma and certainly understand the implications of this. I would also add that I was at the meeting where Swamiji was first accused of sexual abuse by Sylvia Sheila Shapiro, who recently passed away.
And I'm sorry, when did that meeting happen that you just referenced?
That meeting happened in 1970.
I see. And I you have to forgive me. I don't know this backstory. And in that meeting, can you say something of what happened?
I was in California at the time, and I was called by my fellow leaders here in New York to come back east for a meeting. This was a meeting that happened in Danbury, Connecticut. And at that meeting, I was there. A number of the, as I said, the leaders of the New York Institute were there. Sheila was a secretary of serving Swamiji. And of course, Swamiji was there. And at that meeting, she accused Swamiji of sexual advances, at least from what I remember, and about lying about it. There are a number of reports here that, that go back and forth, but I won't get into that. But I would say that Swamiji denied it. It was a very emotional meeting, and that was the first experience that I had with these allegations and about Swamiji's behavior.
And just to say this to all of you, like if I ask a question that you don't want to talk about, or please just feel licensed to pass on it. But I guess at the time, how did you process what had happened there? Was your devotion for him what overrode, or what was your feeling about that meeting after it happened?
It was devastating. I was devastated. I had totally devoted my life at that point to serving Swamiji and to serving and to the teachings. And I knew in my bones that Swamiji was lying. I knew Sheila really well, and there would be no reason why she would falsely accuse him. And I've told the story many times, but I went back home because my parents lived in New York at the time, and my mother knew instantly that something was wrong. And I told her the story, and she shook her head and she said, "I don't know why you're surprised. That man is beautiful." Of course. But she said, think of all the good he has done for you. And at the time, that allowed me to go forward. I have said over the past several years that I feel that is a justification that unfortunately allowed Swamiji to operate continuously in the way that he did.
I guess that really goes straight to the heart of what's so confusing about it, where there are things that people get from these teachers or benefit from these teachers that they cherish, and then also there's these wrongs that are revealed, and both are true, and then they don't really. How do they live together? Is where it gets so troubling.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
And so, Vijay, after that meeting, you went on, you said, to still be involved in the community. Are you still involved to this day, or?
So my involvement has definitely been severed over the past 3 years, 2 to 3 years since all of this has occurred. I was a regular visitor in Virginia. I would be asked to speak. And actually, I'm still, I guess I should say, I'm still involved here in San Francisco with the San Francisco IYI, and probably will give another talk in June. So I am involved, but I'm no longer as close with the community in Virginia as I was a few years ago.
I guess the only other thing that's coming to mind that I'm curious about is that, was there something different about hearing revelations more recent compared to back in 1970 when you were in that meeting? Like, we're in a different context now than we were then.
Well, there is a certain serendipitous quality to, and that's the only way that I can describe it, to what has happened in my life. About 4 years ago, Shanti Norris and I began to talk about these revelations that we knew about. And in my regular visits back to Virginia, she and I would have regular discussions about this. We started to write letters, emails to the board, asking them to address this, which they did not. And then, of course, subsequently, Shanti revealed the relationship that now has become known. Then serendipitously, really serendipitously, I went on a date almost 2 years in August. And this was through a dating website, and I met Sharada. And on that first amazing date, we put it all together, where we knew each other. And then, of course, she told me her experience.
Well, that's a coincidence that's a little bit too uncanny that you two met.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
yes. All right. Well, before I speak with you, Sharada, you sent me that email and which you shared with me quite a bit.
Yes.
Which I would like to speak with you about. But before I do, I don't know anything about Kathleen, and she was included in the meeting. So perhaps, Kathleen, you could say something about you and why you're here.
Okay, Jay. So I've been a follower of Integral Yoga since I was 15 years old in New York City when I attended my first Hatha class at the Integral Yoga Center on 13th Street. 2 weeks after my 15th birthday, I felt like I was in heaven. I just loved the class. I loved the prayers after the class. May the entire creation be filled with peace and joy, love and light. Lead us from unreal to real. Lead us from darkness to the light. Lead us from the fear of death to the knowledge of our immortality. I loved that class so much, and I remember feeling like I was in church, and I loved going to church. So I knew at that time that I was going to be involved with Integral Yoga for my whole life. And I didn't get to hear Swami Satchidananda in person until I guess I was in my late teens, early 20s. But when he spoke, I just felt an automatic connection. I was sitting in the back of a crowded church, and he spoke of the Christian scriptures, and he made my Christian faith come alive in ways that nobody else had before. And I started going on Integral Yoga retreats. I was in New York, and the retreats were held in Connecticut. I started going to shorter retreats, like 2 or 3 days, but then I started going on 10-day silent retreats. And I can say I've been to about 20 of them. And they were like the bedrock of my year. They kept me centered. They kept me on the path. Because of Swami Satchidananda, I became a vegetarian, which growing up Irish Catholic, eating meat 3 times a day, that was pretty much unheard of. I just loved him. I never really got close to him. I just knew him from afar. I would listen to his lectures. I would listen to him speak. I would go to the retreats and practice. And I took yoga teachers training there at Yogaville in 1987 at the first class there. In fact, my teacher trainer was Nischala Devi, who I know you know because she's been on your show a few times, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I loved the teachings, I loved the lifestyle, and I loved the other teachers there, who I've actually become friends with in these later years. So when Shanti's revelations came out about, 2-3 years ago, I was devastated, and so was my husband. In fact, I married somebody who had been a monastic at Yogaville for about 23 years, and he left the monastery for me. And he would always talk about the allegations and the women, and he would say, they're just crazy. Because a woman, Susan Cohen, came out in 91 with her story, and a lot of people left the organization. And my husband just felt like, that could never happen. But when Shanti came out and said this, my husband said, well, there's too much smoke for there not to be fire. And coming from an ex-monastic, I mean, that's a lot to say. And I couldn't help but believe also. And more than anything else, I wanted to talk about it with people, and nobody wanted to talk about it. And just like Vijay just said, the leadership doesn't want to address it. They came out with some vague statements. What I heard for decades was, I choose not to believe, from the leaders at Yogaville or from a long-time devotees. I choose not to believe. But none of them ever said, and if it came to be true that he did these things, well, that's okay. None of them said that. It was just, I choose not to believe. The implication being that it was too horrific even to think about, that he would, or even to consider, that he would have sex with his students. So people at the Yogaville Community Association, who are these young people, maybe in their 30s, who live across the street from Yogaville, God bless them, they had a Zoom healing session. I think about 200 people were there at the session just to talk about this. We all had 1 minute to talk because, time was limited. And that was wonderful to hear perspectives from all sides. People said, some people said, I always suspected this was true. Some people said, these women were just, they had their karma coming to them. He was blessing them in a disguised way. My husband, to his wonderful credit, spent his entire minute apologizing to Sita, Susan Cohen, for not believing her. But it was a wonderful meeting, but I wanted more. So I started a Facebook group for Sangha members called the Sangha Soundboard. I didn't want to put the name Yogaville in the title because I didn't want to associate it with Yogaville. I just wanted it to be my group. And we had a lot of people join. At one point, we had close to 200 people. It was the topic that everybody's talking about. Everybody's continuing to talk about it in private conversations, in private emails, in private Facebook messages. Some people from the ashram actually came onto the group and were copying our writings and giving them to the leadership there at Yogaville, giving our writings to the swamis. And at first I was okay with it because I just want to get to the truth. I want to find out what happened. One of the first things that I remember, actually the first thing I remember learning from Swami Satchidananda is the importance of a neutral mind, like a scale set at 0. A mind that has no interest in the outcome, but is neutral and sees all from a little bit of a distance. And that's what I wanted to cultivate in this. I love him. The first time he looked at me in my eyes, I had this amazing sense of respect and love and care. It was as if he saw the part of me, that spark of God that lives in me, and that he was looking at that in me from that place in him. And that was before I learned even about the word namaste. I had that experience from him. I loved him. He helped me so much in my life. And learning about what happened and hearing from other devotees, I've processed a lot of this. I'm still not at the place where I want to be, but I know that Swamiji placed a great value on truth. His name, Satchidananda, he would tell us it means truth, knowledge, and bliss. He named his iconic temple the Light of Truth Universal Shrine. And he taught us to pray at the end of every hatha class and before every meal. May the light of truth overcome all darkness, victory to that light. And I believe with all my heart that if we get to the truth of this, we'll find God, we'll find peace. Because we practice, in Integral Yoga, we practice Pratipakshapapana, which means to replace a thought that disturbs our mind with a more peaceful thought. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the senior devotees are replacing the thought of Swamiji having inappropriate sexual relationships with his students and lying about it. Well, they're replacing those thoughts with the thoughts that the students must have.
That's where it becomes a bypass. Exactly.
Right. They must have asked for it. He had lots of women falling all over him. He was a rock star. He was helping them. He's incapable of doing any harm. Right. So that's their way of replacing one thought with another. But tell me, are those thoughts peaceful? No, they're not. So I'm thinking Pratipakshapavana is really replacing a disturbing thought with the highest thought, something that's true, but more true.
Let me stop you for a second. Let me stop you for a second. And let me first say, it seems like one of you may have some music on in the background. And if it is the case, if you could turn that off, that would be better for our technical reasons. But I would say that from what I hear you saying is there's sometimes I've had people on where we've discussed these things, and there's kind of what you said, where there's a sort of explaining away of obvious abuse, where like the idea of you use that principle of turning your thoughts towards a higher idea as a way of like glossing over this horrible stuff that's happened. But then there's also the question that we have discussed many times, which is, can you separate the teacher from the teachings? And how much of what, like all these good things that you've just shared that you learned is sort of the example of what I was saying, where there clearly has been great benefit and inspiration and soul-fulfilling experiences that you had with this person, and you're expressing honest love for this person in the same way that Radha did. But at the same time, that can't gloss over. And it is very difficult, as I was saying when we started, to kind of reconcile those two things, that the same person was so hurtful and a fraud. Some people would say a fraud.
Yes, that's right. Some people say that. Lots of people are saying that. But then you say, you just ask, can you separate the teacher from the teachings? Well, he himself would say to us, I am just the instrument of God. I am just the mouthpiece. And he would point to a physical speaker on the floor, like a speaker. And he would say, I'm like that speaker there. He said, if you see anything good in me, it's because it's in you and I'm your mirror, he would say. I mean, that was so true. But I think a lot of us didn't want to believe that. We wanted to attribute all of the goodness to him. But I think the true Pratipakshapavana is to realize that God uses anybody. God can use anybody in anything, even somebody who's flawed, even somebody who's limited and weak, like he apparently was, if these women's accounts are true, and I have no reason to disbelieve them.
Yeah.
God will use anybody, and God used him in beautiful ways. But unfortunately, and I believe the women, I have no reason to doubt them, like I said, I believe he also abused women, and he very successfully lied about it and very successfully covered it up so that only a few people knew. And what I would like to know is who else knew? And did any of these women do it with him like a religious offering? Like was there a circle who provided women for him? Like
I don't know any of those answers, but I think,
don't either.
I think that it is, even just listening to you, it's difficult. As I said, it's so difficult to reconcile like the idea of God working through someone who then does manipulative and harmful things.
Yeah, but I'm
not saying that's not true, and how again, that's one of the issues that's happened, where people, as you said, placed these people on pedestals in a way that's not healthy for anybody to be put on, it seems to me.
Right. I agree.
But let me, honestly, you were asking questions about people who are directly harmed by Swami Satchidananda, and Sharada was directly harmed by him.
I think Vijay just got something to say.
Well,
go ahead.
The thing here, Jay, is the impact of this. so much has been made of the positive impacts of Swamiji's teachings and Swamiji's interactions and relationships with people. But on this particular element, the impact of not just the sexual revelations about the sexual relationships, but the lying.
Mm-hmm.
The lying has been a feature from the very first meeting right to this very day. And it is that is a stain on this organization, the community, and the teachings itself.
Mm-hmm.
Truth, as Saraswati is saying, truth is one of the teachings, and it clearly is something that Swamiji did not, in this particular area, never wanted to acknowledge it. And there were multiple attempts made by members in the community to address this with him while he was alive, and he did not want to come clean with it. And because of that, people were ostracized and had to leave the community. And that is an impact that happened really just, it's been happening all along. And that is really, for me, is the real tragedy of all of this, because this has ripped a community apart. It has ripped friendships of many years totally apart. And I think Sharada wanted to say something.
Well, let me say one other thing, which is that having heard now, since Sharada sent me some of the details about what happened to you, Sharada, I don't see how he could come clean on that. That's sort of to my point. Like, if he's this enlightened being, he can't come clean on that, because then it so contradicts the idea that was put forth of who and what he was.
Right.
So can I
Please do.
Thank you. It's hard to know where to start. This is a big subject.
Yeah.
We could talk about problems with him. We could talk about
if it's okay,
with the organization.
if it's okay, given what we just heard from Vijay and Kathleen, could you say what you're comfortable talking about here about what happened to you?
I'm comfortable talking about any of it at this point, because it seems as though short of that, people at least in the community, are not capable of the kind of empathy that I would have expected. It has to be quite graphic for anybody to soften to what I've said. So when I started going to the IYI as a teenager, my experience was that I had come into a family. It didn't have the feeling of a business. It didn't have the feeling of a cult. It didn't even have the feeling that much of a super organized spiritual organization. But it was a very warm, enthusiastic group of young people. And we were living and practicing together. And Swami Satchidananda positioned himself 100% as our father.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I feel like it should be mentioned that you were 17, if I'm not mistaken, at the time.
17,
and you had a very strained relationship with your father, you mentioned to me in your email.
I was estranged from my family and very much on my own at a very young age. And so the Institute was a refuge for me. It was a lifeline. He was a lifeline for me. And I always heard him talk about us as his children. We would say, we want to be like Papa when we grow up. right? Do a lot of japa. And he was able to disarm me emotionally in a way that was quite healing for me. And I was very happy living at the IYI. I actually knew Sheila. I had gone to high school with her brother who had introduced me to Swamiji. So when I came in, I felt like I already knew someone there. And when the story with her broke, I couldn't really take it in. I don't know how to explain that, except that I've heard the same thing from a lot of people, that we heard it, we knew, we didn't disbelieve it, but we couldn't take it in.
Mm-hmm.
Now, around that time period, shortly after the meeting that Vijay was in, Swamiji called and told me that he was sending me to California because of all the troubles that were happening. And I was a massage therapist. The Yogaville West was a retreat center that had massage and hot springs. And so I would go out there and spend the summer and just get a little break from whatever was going on. And that's what I did.
It should be mentioned, you like worked for the institute, right? Like you worked there.
I was a yoga teacher in New York City, and I practiced massage at the place in Lake County.
Right.
And so at the end of the summer, Swamiji came out for a workshop, and I was invited to stay in his house and be his secretary, along with another much more senior secretary who's no longer around. And he was processing what had happened in New York, I think. And I saw another side of him, that he was very vulnerable, apparently vulnerable, and he would sob and cry and wail in my lap. And he would say, "They're my children. How can they say such terrible things about me?"
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.